thousands of ways to propagate plants. I mean, thousands. Let's see if I can find this program.
It's like he wants to be like healthy.
Yeah, let him do that. It would really be called propagation. V4. Does that work? Okay, we're back at it. Okay, I've done this program before here. How many people remember the program that I did here 4 years ago? Not that many. Okay, good. So it'd be due to
That was extremely good and thorough.
Oh, no pressure. Thank you, Roger. A couple of disclaimers on this one as well. Realizing that you had real experts talking about this. This program is very broad. It starts off with some very basic topics. There's one rather odd topic, tactic at the end. This is meant for those people who are good all the way up to fairly good. And there might be a couple of you in here who have not seen some of these things. So if there's one tactic in here that is useful to you, then I'm okay with that. I think most of you have probably encountered many of these things before. A couple of overarching concepts. Number one, and this is one I really have learned over the last 40 years. Why? What are you propagating plants for? And that's the first best question. Because I've met so many newbies who said, oh wow, I love this plant. I want to make 30 or 40 of them. Why? What are you going to do with them? Huh? What are you going to do with them? Maybe. Not everybody sells plants.
Give them away.
To whom?
Other people are just as crazy as I
People
am.
love making plants. And after a year, they've got plants. Lots of plants. And you walk in their back, well, if you can walk in their back. What are you going to do with all these? You know, the joy of making them is really pretty cool. And nowadays, with some of the plants that I know and love, aeroids that are fetching a month's rent for a 6-inch pot. Why didn't you tell me this 2 years ago? I had flats of philodendron pink princess. I threw them out because they grew so slowly. And nowadays people go, where did you throw them out? What's the GPS of it? Where are they now? So I just want to kind of get our mindset going. Why bother? There are dozens, if not hundreds of ways. I did a quick internet search last week. There are over 19,000 references to plant propagation techniques. I'm not going to cover them, and I'm not touching on grafting. You've had very good people, I'm sure, grafted amongst them, teaching you how to graft. First of all, I don't know how to do it. Second, it's failed every time I've tried. Third, people say, oh, it's easy. Forget that part. And fourth, I challenge you to graft a shrimp plant. I'm sure somebody could do it, but it seems to be that the closer you get to Vietnam, the more successful you are about grafting. So I just want to give a couple of quick intros here. We're going to cover tip cuttings, rooting hormones, simple layering, my favorite, air layering, seedling culture, sanitation methods, one that I don't talk about enough, and one rather odd technique that will keep your attention. So, we're going to start with one of Crafton's favorites. And for this, I'm going to have to go off mic. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Right. So, this is what you came for. We're going to do a cutting propagation in 3 easy steps. I'll do it in slow motion. Rooting hormone. Take your pick, what type you like. Following on with one of the safety protocols, safety glove, the target. Am I going too fast? This is peat moss and perlite, half and half. One sterilized clipper. One unsuspecting plant. Read the top line. Flip it, dip it, stick it. Now, this is a great opportunity for you to do this out loud. And the entire group of you, we'll see how good you are. Ready?
That paints my admission.
Thank you all for attending today's program.
Could you repeat that?
Would you like a slow motion replay, sir? Now, the odd thing is that many people think that there's more complicated than that. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Of all the things that you have heard today, you'll probably remember that last part. When everybody in the room told me to. I have heard that from many people. So with that being said, rooting hormones are really powerful things. Consider that many of the synthetic rooting hormones can put roots on wood. Now, people like Crafton and some other people can graft rebar to a 2x4 and let it grow. I know some people that can root pencils. But rooting hormones are surprisingly toxic things. They usually come in powder form. I happen to like this one. It's called Clonex because it's a gel form. It stays on the plant even if you just jam it into the soil. What you've seen there is pretty much the whole ballgame. And the nice thing about this auditorium is there's a screen back there that shows exactly what I'm saying above my head. So if I can read that far, because I'm getting old. But one key point I really wanted to bring home to you is, look, rooting hormones are anywhere from 1,000 to 100,000 times stronger than natural rooting hormones. IBA, NAA, and some others are extremely potent. Get them into cuts, they can get into real trouble. If you happen to be doing things like rooting desert roses, which are toxic to begin with, should you happen to use a very sharp clipper, and you have rooting hormone on the clipper and sap on the clipper, and you get it into your blood, the technical term for what will happen after that is you will have a bad day. The non-technical term for that is something that I shouldn't say on camera. So, gloves are mandatory. For the powder form of rooting hormones, I would certainly recommend one of those nifty, sexy COVID masks, just to keep the dust out of your nose and mouth. With that said, there are zillions of different ways to propagate plants. And one of the key things is to try to keep them, keep them well hydrated is the biggest thing. Keep them well fed is something different. And one of my favorite topics over the years, go away. They're gone, damn spot. There are some tactics that are slightly new, or at least slightly new to a few people. And one of them is to carbo load your plants before you cut them. Last time I had a large shrimp plant. What I would suggest is if you're going to make cuttings of something, feed the plants several times before you do that. And I have gotten to be a real fanatic about not only feeding plants at the roots, but also the foliage. Having worked with fertilizers for two-thirds of my life, A lot of the stuff that's off the shelf still works. But a lot of the stuff that's from hydroponics works a lot better. Now, the hydroponic fertilizers are about 5 times the cost of rapid grow. And you need 1/5 as much and you get twice the results. However that works out for you, it works out pretty well. Most of the hydroponic fertilizers are nitrate based. They get sucked into the plant quickly. They're used very efficiently. And you can jockey what you want. More foliage, more roots, stems, fruit. And I found this out some years ago because I bought a small container called Monster Buds. Now, being naive and from Wisconsin, I asked the owner, what does that mean? And Carlos just went, you're kidding, right? No. Pot. Oh. Thank you. Monopotassium phosphate. We'll talk about that in just a second. So, without going into a long diatribe of what fertilizers do, hydroponic fertilizers allow you to do what you want to do on pretty much any schedule you want to do it in short time frames. So I would suggest, A, we carb load the plants, pumping them up with extra potassium and phosphorus. Potassium for a lot of strength, stem tissue. Phosphorus will give you some very nice roots. Extra nitrogen will give you lots of foliage that's soft and doesn't necessarily help rooting. It might in some cases where you have big leaves, if you have mist available, but generally speaking, you want more tissue strength and you want more carbs inside the plant for roots than we do for foliage. This is one that has a long tongue twisting name, but look at these numbers. No nitrogen, 53% phosphorus, 34% potassium. Can help with the process if you want to go with the extra step. You can get this online in relatively small quantities, half a pound or a pound. It doesn't mess up the local water supply. And for those, how many orchid growers do we have? One orchid grower? Okay, now that he raised his hand, the other people are going, I guess it's okay too, I'll admit it. 3 out of what, 40? What's wrong with you people? I tried this in Miami, they would tackle me. Yeah, but even in the fruit people over in Miami, they go, yeah, we got some orchids in the backyard. That one product right there will do more for bringing about extra flowers if you use it in the fall. And that's also a neat trick I saw in Hawaii when I did some industrial espionage at a dendrobium farm outside of Hilo. In August, they started pumping up their plants with this before the plants went leafless. These plants had this huge load of phosphorus and potassium in them, and come March, when they were ready to flower, twice the number of flowers. Not bad. So I got away from the Monster Buds at an incredible price and went to this, which is a not incredible price. But any hydroponic fertilizer with more than 20%, this number here, will help a lot if you do it before cutting. And intuitively, this makes a bit of sense. More food inside the cuttings, the better your chances of rooting should be. You can also feed the plants after you do the cuttings, which is kind of hard for people to get in their mind. And here is what MKP looks like in one fashion. It's widely sold agriculturally, but you can also get it in other forms. You can get smaller numbers. This is 7, 12, 27. Both of these are labeled for hydroponics, which means they dissolve instantly. They're made to be absorbed quickly. They just don't last long in the plant. So they're absorbed quickly, used quickly, no byproducts. Yes, sir.
How do you apply them? How do you apply the
Foliage. You dissolve it in water and spray it on the foliage. You can also put either of these into water, they're water soluble. You can put them into the roots, they'll suck it up. One of the oldest tricks I can remember when I was in college in Wisconsin was to spray fields with potassium nitrate to be exact, before a sharp frost. And you could increase the cell thickness within an hour or two. It would buy you one night of frost protection. And that carried on. I heard that from Seymour Goldweber in Homestead. They used to spray fields of mangoes back in the 40s and 50s huge amounts of potassium nitrate, 50 pounds per 100 gallons. Buys you 5 degrees of frost protection, one night. If you could, if all you're gonna get is one night, but otherwise it's very expensive. Unfortunately, it sort of worked in reverse because he bought frost protection, with that much extra potassium gave you incredible roots on mango trees, and more or less stopped the trees cold. They grew incredible roots, but that's it. So you had to feed them something else to get them to go back to growing again. Okay, so again, really basic. U2 4 from the 4 or 5 node cuttings, 1, 2, 3, 4, half an inch or so between the node and the cut. And this is an old Victorian print, just for those people who've never seen these before. Generally one node in the rooting medium. Depends on what you're rooting, you can put 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 8. But for the most part, you want really short cuttings. The shorter the cutting, the less it will lose water. And that's the really big key, keep the plants hydrated. How do you do that? People think you need a mist system, but you don't. We'll get to the really odd technique in just a minute. What to use to root the plants? One thing I can say with certainty is rooting hormones work in every case I've ever tried on cuttings, period. It's the only absolution I've ever run into, is rooting hormones work better than none. Has anybody seen that otherwise? Don't raise your hands all at once. So what you use as rooting hormones is up to you. But more commercial growers I know of than not use this one in the middle, because you can vary what concentrate you want. This comes at about 10,000 times stronger than you need. The usual dilution is maybe 2 drops in an ounce of water. Many people can use it stronger. I know some growers that get their cuttings directly into this, in which case, be careful, you might grow extra fingers. Potent stuff. 1 to 100 is one dilution for softwood cuttings, 1 to 25 for hardwood cuttings. When you soak them for a minute, 2 seconds, there's a chart there. There's plenty of information about it. If you're just reading softwood cuttings, Honex works just fine. Hormone comes in several different varieties. This is a gel. This is a liquid. It's extremely potent. This one is powdered. It's in talcum form. This hormone comes in hormone 1, 2, 3, and I think 5. Powerful stuff. It looks like talcum powder. That's really what it is. It has a bad habit of dusting in your face. So one of the techniques I saw online was to pour out the powder into a small cup, use that to root your cuttings, and dispose of that. The less you handle this stuff, the better. I have never contaminated a jar of this by dipping cuttings into it. What I do, however, is wear gloves and a face mask with this. This one, not so much. Just gloves. This one, just gloves. Any questions so far? You're still awake? Good. Yes, sir.
Somebody mentioned like honey and the cinnamon.
Honey and-
cinnamon. Or what do we call it? I mean, for.
I can barely hear you.
Honey and cinnamon.
Honey and cinnamon.
Honey and cinnamon?
What are your thoughts on that?
I go back to my statement that there are about 1,000 different things you can use. I know some people that use aspirin in distilled water. Salicylic acid is an old rooting hormone. Lots of things can help root plants. One of Fairchild's tactics to help root plants in long shipment, keep plants alive in long-term shipment, was to put scions and bud sticks jammed into potatoes. And in many cases, they rooted in shipment. So if you look at all these internet memes and hacks and things, people are talking about, you're going to root your cuttings in a banana, bury the banana. If you like the synthetic stuff, these work really well. They're very fast compared to not using them. Okay, I mentioned the idea of feeding the plants after they've been cut. This is probably the biggest game changer I've had in horticulture, at least in my life, in propagation. What do you mean feed the plants after they're cut? There's no roots. Hello? It's got foliage. Foliar fertilizing is really underrated. And man, the results are amazing. I've used all of these. If someone wanted to give me a good Christmas present, they could give me a pound of this and be their friend forever. These are all hydroponics. These two are the ones I use on my orchids. This one, when I get a good tax return, I'll buy this one. It's $26 a pound. But to give you an idea how effective they can be, the carnivorous plant growers who are really good at it, they grow and hybridize nepenthes, use this stuff. Which means it's very safe, it grows the plants well, it does what they want it to do, it doesn't burn the roots, it doesn't stack up soluble salts in the medium. And some carnivorous plants are probably the canary in the coal mine for salt buildup or for being unhappy with strong fertilizers.
Can you use these fertilizers in non-hydroponic?
Absolutely. Can you use the fertilizers in non-hydroponics? Absolutely. What I'm doing with mine, I use these two. I just mix them up at a half teaspoon per gallon and spray my orchids with them once a week. They work great. Plants just pick it right up. They grow bigger foliage, more flowers, and more roots. I just flinch whenever I have to buy them. This one on the left, there's hundreds of hydroponic fertilizers. They all work if you spray them on foliage routinely. So here is the conundrum. After you've taken the cutting, put it into the rooting hormone, got it into the rooting medium, then what? How do you keep it hydrated? Two basic ways, with overhead mist and without. For those of you who have more advanced systems, you might have misting systems where you keep cuttings hydrated. In which case, how do you keep foliar fertilizer on the foliage? Qualified point. You might use a product loosely called a spreader sticker. Commercially, this is commonplace. In the non-commercial world, not so much. New Film 17 and this one from Southern Ag work pretty well. Spray your soluble fertilizers on your cuttings, mix this product in with liquid fertilizer, it's stuck.
Do you have to worry about buildup?
Not much, you only do it once with the sticker. After that, you can apply fertilizer after fertilizer after fertilizer. The sticker only needs to be used one time.
Now, you said about using hydroponic fertilizers in regular soil plants. Is it just for misting, or you can actually use it in the soil also?
You can use them as a mist and in the soil too. Depending on how fast the plants root. Now, if you're trying to root magnolias and array of rhododendrons, you'll be waiting the rest of your natural life before they really strike roots. I mean, realistically, it's 8 months to 3 years.
Wow.
Putting fertilizer into the roots is pointless until they set roots. For softer wood things, annuals and such, a little dynamite or osmocote mixed into the medium works fine. But foliar fertilizing works really, really well. Works quickly, you get immediate gratification within the next day. And when the time comes that you want to take the plants out and harden them off, you can back off liquid fertilizers very quickly. The plants will run out a little bit of more sun. Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. The club's mist house is cycled to mist every 15 minutes for 4 seconds.
Yikes!
Was that too much?
No.
And will the spreader sticker be effective
Every 15 minutes.
within that 15 minutes?
This is a situation that if you're going to do that, try that. New Film 17 is an agricultural sticker. It's meant for use on things like soybeans and sorghum and wheat and rice once in the spring. You could probably stick somebody to a wall with that stuff at a higher rate. I mean, it'd be kind of cool for a bank robbery. At a slightly lower rate, you could use New Film 17. Once, as the cuttings go in, let it dry off, put them in the mist. Once it's dried, it's waterproof or water resistant. After that, you can still foliar feed. probably every week or two. And the fertilizer will go in, even though that has been applied. Everybody got that part?
Yeah.
So we're gonna pump the fertilizer into the plants before they get cut and continue to feed them after they get cut. Because, as one great grower I know of said, how else are they going to get resources? People lose cuttings like crazy. They have no way to feed themselves. So you cut off most of the foliage so you can put it into the cutting bed. How are you going to get it to stay alive? It's running on whatever reserves it has in the leaves. Or adding more reserves to the foliage. Did that all make sense? My strange accent didn't screw anybody up? Okay. I'm from a different country, forgive me. Okay, simple layering, the easiest thing in the world to do. For those things that have flexible branches and you want to make more, pin a branch to the ground. The end. People don't do this very much at all. One of the aeroids I really happen to like at the Canton is an Epipremnum species that could take 2 years to root from cuttings, even if it had roots when we took the cuttings. It knew that it was off mother plant and it just stopped cold. The cutting would survive in suspended animation, didn't lose a leaf, didn't grow a leaf. Ended up, and even with air layers, it didn't root. Ended up doing this. Bend the cane over, put it on the ground, add a rock, problem solved. Don't know why. Could be simply the change in the polarity between growing up versus growing down. I didn't ask the plant, it didn't tell me. This is called simple layering, it's also called ground layering. Very common in the northern states for things like raspberries and some of the cane fruits, works like a charm. Now this one gets interesting because air layering is sort of between grafting and cutting. And not too recently, but sort of recently, I've come up with these interesting plastic devices that you can snap around the part that you cut. And to give you a quick idea of what air layering is all about, you start off with a twig or a branch, cut the bark away, add moss or soil, usually it's sphagnum moss, but it could be peat moss, core fiber, and the old-fashioned technique is to wrap it in plastic sheeting or aluminum foil, tie both ends, and wait. Popular way to grow mangoes, lychees, longans, and so on. Okay, for those of you who have done air layers, it's not difficult, it's just tedious. And a lot of the part right in here, the stuff falls away from you. So somebody overseas, probably Cambodia, developed these nifty little things that are two halves, one side and the other. They like to use core fiber, coconut fiber, nice and wet and packed in like a brick. You snap these two together, and then you're done. No foil, no plastic, no tying, nothing. Cool, well I found these on Amazon. One side's clear, one side's dark. They'll be here at my place on Tuesday. Dying to try that, because you can see if the thing's rooted. And some of the crotons I've had for many years are now 12 feet tall. They're later the top 5 or 6 feet. Give it to someone else. Especially when somebody says, oh, that's a beautiful croton. Here. One of the most moving things that ever happened to me as an intern at Fairchild was when I said, that is the coolest palm I've ever seen. Here. Okay, so the joke was on me because it was Copernicia baileyana, the Bailey palm. The seeds took 3 years to germinate. But they spent 2 more years as grass foliage. I had them for about 6 years after that. But the concept of, that's a cool plant, here. Well, I've lectured to bromeliad societies and orchid societies. When I talk to bromeliad societies, I take a shot at the orchid societies and vice versa. But the one thing I like about the bromeliad societies more than anything is you can go to somebody's home and they've got a whole field of a bromeliad. And somebody goes, that is awesome, right here. You go to an orchid grower's house and they've got a whole tree full of Cattleya skinneri and you go, that is just awesome. And they go, yep. And then you stare at them like, how'd you like? Iced tea? So the neat thing about bromeliads, so many times, here, or in some seeds, pitcairneas that seed like crazy. So that's the neat thing about air layering. In this case, if it works as I hope it will, 2 halves, packed with a ball of sphagnum or coconut fiber, snap the shell shut, use your zip ties. I think in my case, I'll just clip them together, done. A stack of these was $13 for 10 of them, and they're reusable.
And do you wet the coconut wire?
Yes,
Okay.
almost soaking wet.
Okay.
If you look at some of the YouTube videos, you see people using 2-liter soda bottles for this sort of thing. I tried that, it was a horrible mistake. I ended up with cut fingers and a major mess. So again, I think it's one of those things that you need to be a certain height and nationality to do the job.
After I cut it around, I always put rooting hormone on it before I put the stuff in.
She was saying that after she does this cut, she puts rooting hormone on there. In most cases, I would agree with you, but on certain flowering trees, I've found out it doesn't work as well. And the ones that come to mind are the big cassias, Cassia fistula, Cassia cyanea. Rooting hormone is too strong. Surprising. Without the hormone, they root fine, and they're talking about branches that are this thick. Most everybody will root something that's like that thick or this thick. You think young, vibrant tissue on some of the bigger flowering trees, even poincianas, 2-inch caliper. So you end up with a rooted air layer that's 8 feet long, but it's rooted. So up until a couple of years ago, I would have agreed with you. Just a gentle rooting hormone.
I used it on my rainbow cassia and the Queens Road, Hospital Road cassia.
I've got both of those. I've been trying that for 20 years, and finally several flowering tree people said skip the hormone. It worked perfectly. Now, what hormone to use here and whether you take all the bark off are 2 big discussion points. Many people cut a full ring of bark off. Some people cut half that off and leave half connecting tissue. Some people will make it slice down one side and jam it open with a toothpick. All of those work for everybody else. For me, I've gone with a full outskirt, this type, polyethylene, clear plastic, usually wrapped with foil. The biggest problems I've run into with this are about 2 things. One, squirrels love to harvest the sphagnum moss for nesting material. And the second is it makes one hell of a good ant nest. So I've gotten to the point of mixing 7 insecticide into the moss. That solves that. Okay, very, very basic seed culture. This is absolutely propagation 101. But most people skip a step. Clean seeds, clean media, clean pots, clean tools, success, okay? No need to dwell on that. But what do you clean them with? And the old dogma has been bleach. Well, bleach works great, except on cutting tools. You'll end up with sterile, rusted tools. For those 2 people who were orchid growers, really disappointed too. TSP has been around for 50 years. Everybody knows it for cleaning walls, hubcaps, so on. It's a dandy sterilizer. It is so alkaline, it will kill viruses. In fact, it's the weapon of choice as a viricide. And still keep your tools intact. You can store tools in a solution of this stuff for weeks and they won't rust. So there you go, 6 to 8 tablespoons per pint of water for sterilizing cutting tools. So put the tools in, wait a minute or 2 or 3, clean tools. Your chances of any pathogen surviving that are pretty slim. You don't have to go quite that strong for sterilizing things like plastic. Usually a cup in 5 gallons is stable, so you can use it from day to day to day to day. When it gets too dirty that you can't see it anymore, you make it in batch. Unlike bleach, it does not perforate your clothes, it doesn't sting your hands. And it's not particularly toxic to the environment. Everything is these days, but Unlike bleach, you can pour this on concrete surfaces and it's okay. Cleaning seeds. A lot of people don't. They clean the flesh off the fruit, they clean the flesh off the seed, plant the seed. Big fungus problems. For those of you who are airway growers or palm growers, surface sterilizing seeds is a big deal. Hydrogen peroxide right out of the bottle works just great. Surprisingly effective and surprisingly cheap. And boy, talk about eco-effective. It's just water. With one extra oxygen, it works beautifully. Spilled on you, clean you. Should you cut yourself? You've got hydrogen peroxide right there. You can use very dilute bleach if you want to. 1 ounce per gallon, 5 to 10 seconds, rinse with pure water. Now for those of you who want to sterilize pots and bleach, you need a lot more bleach. You still need a pure water rinse. Otherwise the chlorine can do some real problems. So far so good? I don't want to bite too far into Matt's time. How do you sterilize media? Easiest way, get it out of the bag. But if you really want to sterilize your media, forget the chemistry, go for microwaves, works like a charm. If you want to sterilize a few pots full of medium, first of all, do it in a clay pot. Trust me on this. Put the medium into a clay pot, wet the medium, microwave, on high, 4 to 5 minutes does the job. Steam sterilized. If anything can survive that, it can stay alive. It's okay. You can also bake it, but that takes a lot longer. Microwaving media in a plastic pot does not work. I won't tell you how I know that. I don't think that the growing medium for seedlings is as fussy as people think it needs to be. We don't need to use the Australian gold, Samoan core mix. Most of these mixes work just great. Peat moss and perlite. Here's a dot, which is what we have here in the front. Straight up perlite for some of the bigger seeds. Miracle Grow seed starting mix still works great for about 6 months. It's very fine grained, it drains well, it's convenient, it's easy to store, it's not too expensive. It just doesn't last very long. Most of these Canadian peat-based mixes only last 6 to 8 months. At that point, if your seeds haven't germinated, you have to put them in a new mix. Okay, keeping seedlings and cuttings hydrated. Again, many of you have done this for a long time. This is old hat. One of the things that is kind of new hat are plant domes. For those of you of a certain age, bell jars. If you could find them at rummage sales, they work beautifully. Make it good terrariums too. Cloche is another term for them. I still use these. I don't know why, but they have gotten ridiculously expensive. But they still work. My favorite kind is on the right. It's just a dome in a plastic tray. Add water to the bottom. It sucks it up by capillary action on the fluorescent light. Now, in case you want to do a little bedtime reading, these are 3 good books. Combined, there are 1,000 pages. There are probably not too many copies between the 3, too many duplications. So, yeah, there's a lot to be said. Well, that one, from Bruce McDonald, mostly hardwoods and temperate. The Hartman and Custer book covers just about everything from A to Z, and plant propagation is more illustrated than not. But it does stir your mind of going, well, you know, I hadn't thought of that. And if that's all I've accomplished with this part of the program, then I've succeeded. Okay, we get to the end of the relatively odd technique. Well, here's the relatively odd technique. A great way to repurpose an old aquarium. And I use this tactic to germinate some palm seeds that require 90-degree Fahrenheit temperatures. One of the weirdest things I learned in college is that most palm seeds germinate at a stable temperature 24 hours a day, not 95 and 75. Even a 5-degree differential between day and night can make a difference in germination. The more stable the temperature, the more stable the germination. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it works. Oil palms are germinated commercially in huge germination cases. The seeds are sterilized, put into Ziploc bags, and put into a germination chamber at about 86, give or take 1/10 of a degree. So I modified that tactic to using an old tactic for germinating fern spores. There's an old aquarium that holds water. You add about 3 to 4 inches of water to the bottom. I'm using clay pots inverted. Add a submersible aquarium heater and set the temperature to about 80. And one would think, well, why bother with 80? It's 88 outside. Well, 80 is fine if you're doing this indoors because it's going to be 80 degrees every day, every night, every day, every night. If you're putting this outside, you might want to set the temperature even a little warmer, like 82 or 83, because our days are not 88 in the day and 88 at night. That difference in temperature slows down germination. So we want that temperature difference to be very small. That tactic, water in the aquarium, submersible aquarium heater is about $20. You only need a really small aquarium heater. It only heats 10 gallons of water because you're going to add 2 gallons. So far, we've got 3 or 4 inches of water just below the surface levels of the pots. Put my clay pots with my seedlings on top of these. Moisture from the clay pot in the water wicks up into the clay pot with the seeds. Even humidity works perfectly. You have 100% humidity. And here comes the fun part. We just need to add a little light. From the world of hydroponics, cold light. Virtually no heat. You can try using fluorescent lights, but they tend to be warm. And this also makes your neighbors very curious as to what you're doing. This is one of the hydroponic lamps that is all LED. It tends to specialize in things like ceiling growth that use far red and far blue. There's not much in the way of a spectrum in between. This is a relatively inexpensive unit. They're about $30. You can cover this with whatever you like. A sheet of Lexan, a sheet of glass works fine. You don't have to worry about the heat cracking that. And there isn't much heat from those LED lights, so you're not going to cook everything in here. I've had terrariums for years, and I had some wonderful begonias. I had a beautiful 4-tube fluorescent light on there, left for a long weekend, came back, the terrarium was toast. The inside temperature was 98. Fluorescent lights are still really hot. LEDs are not. So that's the relatively odd technique. You can scale this up to whatever size you want. But in terms of providing an incredibly stable environment to grow seeds that need a very stable temperature,